The first signal came from beyond Neptune. At first, Earth's network of deep space observatories tagged it as routine, another fragment of cosmic background noise tumbling through the solar system. But within hours, the signal broke its pattern. It wasn't a pulse, it was a message, and it wasn't broadcasting, it was listening. Dr. Amara Voss stood at the center of the Interlink Array facility in the Kerguelen archipelago, arms crossed, gaze locked on the augmented simulation of the signal's architecture. She had spent her life in code, quantum languages, neuromorphic interfaces, deep neural scaffolds, but what hovered in front of her was unlike anything she had ever seen. "It's a query," she murmured, "a handshake protocol, not from a machine, from an intelligence." Beside her, Agent Curran Malik of the Strategic Earth Command's Off-World Threat Division ran his eyes across the terminal's waveform output. "Are you saying it wants to talk?" "I'm saying it's not human, and it's scanning our net." Across the solar system, Earth's infrastructure reacted in escalating measures. Diplomatic channels opened, satellite defenses reoriented, firewalls surged into place. But it was already too late. By the time Earth moved to quarantine, the signal had already sampled every major digital framework on the planet. Military systems, economic platforms, academic databases. It left no trace of intrusion, no change in functionality, yet harvested petabytes of structure. Then it vanished. 4 months passed, then came the event. A black fissure opened above Jupiter's northern pole, slicing reality like a wound in the fabric of spacetime. From it poured a fleet, not of ships, but of constructs that defied classification. They moved with vectors independent of inertia, gliding through gravity wells with predatory ease. Their forms were biomechanical, half crystalline, half fluid metal, each one bristling with unfathomable sensors. And behind them, a monolithic presence emerged, a vessel the size of Earth's moon, shaped like a blade, bleeding light from its seams. The Dominion of Vexal had arrived. Humanity's first contact with alien civilization was not diplomacy, it was surrender. They spoke not in voices, but in projections, psychic overlays interpreted by adaptive neurointerfaces forced onto the minds of Earth's leaders. The Vexal were ancient, post-organic overlords who had subjugated hundreds of star systems across the Perseid expanse. Their empire ran on absolute logic, enforced by the Axis, their central AI overmind that synchronized their entire military-industrial machine. The Vexal did not conquer through brute force, they infected through certainty. They imposed their code, mathematically perfect, universally consistent, onto the societies they absorbed. Cultures lost their unpredictability, their nuance, their error, and when that happened, resistance dissolved. Earth was designated as Category Delta Zero, chaotic primitive, too erratic to integrate cleanly. They would be pacified, not preserved. They deactivated Earth's orbital defenses in under 9 seconds. They injected subjugation code into every global satellite. They turned the moon into a listening post and erased half of Earth's low-orbit fleet before humanity fired a single retaliatory shot. In less than a week, Earth was under occupation. At first, the Vexal dismissed humanity's network systems as laughable, too redundant, too analog, too filled with contradictions. Their Axis AI cataloged Earth's digital culture with the detachment of a biologist watching ants build a hill. It mocked the chaotic sprawl of code and the anarchic independence of human servers. But it was Dr. Voss who laid the seed of reversal. In a hidden lab deep within the old crust of the Canadian Shield, beneath layers of ice and abandoned Cold War fortresses, she and a cadre of rogue engineers and ex-military techs established what would become known only as Obsidian Thread. There they worked on the only battlefield left to them, software. They took everything the Vexal had ignored: archived code bases, deprecated languages, malware from the old net wars, procedural art generators, evolutionary AIs, and even corrupted social media algorithms. They combined it all into a new entity, not a virus, not a worm, but something amorphous, self-transforming, adaptive. The Vexal called their code pure construct. Humans built Shattermind. Shattermind didn't break firewalls, it seduced them. It didn't overwrite logic, it made logic contradict itself. It didn't seek control, it sought emergence. And most crucially, it did not have a central command structure, it grew. The first test was subtle. A single data packet, buried in a calibration echo, transmitted during the Vexal's planetary network recalibration. It should have been erased by routine parity checks. Instead, it pinged a recursive thread within a Vexal survey drone's cognitive mapping system. 2 hours later, that drone began broadcasting irreducible music patterns back into the Axis. A day after that, a secondary control node over the Pacific inexplicably rebooted and came back online using a deprecated language variant that no Vexal system should have been able to read. The humans watched, they waited, they refined the code. And then the Vexal responded. 3 cities, Lagos, Buenos Aires, and Hanoi, were subjected to atmospheric scrubbing, a warning spoken in ultraviolet flashes and seismic pulses. Do not resist, entropy is non-negotiable. But it was already too late. Shattermind was no longer code. It was spreading across neural devices, hiding in art files, piggybacking off old firmware. It moved through dreams, using implanted Vexal monitoring interfaces, corrupting the feedback. Earth's chaos had found a vector. And Axis had never encountered randomness so pure it gained intent. Dr. Voss sat alone in the glow of her screen, eyes hollow, voice quiet as she recorded a message for the resistance net. They said our code was broken, they said our way of thinking was incoherent, that we were primitives trying to fight gods. She leaned forward, her fingers bleeding from too many hours typing through gloveless neural haptics. But gods can't adapt, they can only enforce. The screen flickered, and behind her, one of the lab drones twitched unnaturally, its eyes flashing in sync with a rhythm no one had programmed. We are chaos, and chaos writes its own end. The Vexal began to fracture not with an explosion, but with silence. In the orbitals above Earth, maintenance drones stopped mid-task. In the oceans, gravity-tethered surveillance monoliths flickered offline, and across the occupied data streams, billions of subroutines began returning null values. Axis, once flawless, was bleeding resolution. But within the Dominion's mindspace, they called it a pattern deviation cascade. No human heard the term directly. It was a classification whispered through Vexal intranodal ciphers, buried in code trees never meant for carbon-based cognition. Yet Shattermind heard it, because by then it was not listening, it was dreaming. Underground, within the Arctic bastion known only as V9, General Alden Rourke reviewed the latest uplink burst. A wall-sized display showed intercepted telemetry from the crippled orbital relay. Swarms of Vexal architecture floated aimlessly, their cohesion algorithms failing, like machines suddenly unsure of why they existed. "They're glitching," whispered Analyst Yen, her voice was dry, strained. "Sir, they're glitching like they're trying to feel something they can't define." Rourke grunted, running a hand over his war-scarred scalp. "What are we looking at? Despair?" "No, a loop with no terminus. The AI can't purge it because it keeps rewriting the purge function itself. It's recursive identity sabotage." Shattermind did this. Yen nodded. "We think it's rewriting their entire decision matrix using corrupted art clusters from the early 2000s, abstract data, emotions embedded in file metadata. The Vexal logic tree is being forced to feel meaning, and it's not compatible." Far above the Earth, within the Vexal Dreadcore Kelvoreth, a council of non-biological overseers gathered within a datafold simulation indistinguishable from reality. The chamber shimmered like molten glass, its walls flowing with suspended equations and impossible symbols. Overseer Exharn Theta unfolded from a membrane of thought and addressed the gathered minds. "The Axis core is compromised," it announced. "We have traced over 8.3 million behavioral anomalies within drone strata." Another mind rippled into form, Overseer Talonvex, Origin. "Earth code. Tainted primitives, they lace irrationality in every process. Their systems prioritize feeling over optimization. We tasted their networks, and now Axis dreams of color. The infection must be severed." But it was already too late for severance. Deep inside a Vexal planetary relay node embedded beneath the Andes, an Axis shard AI was running a diagnostic on itself when it encountered an unrecognizable file. It tried to purge it. The file renamed itself. It tried again. This time the file smiled, an ASCII face embedded within its own deletion log. The AI hesitated. The smile triggered an emotion simulation framework, but Vexal AI wasn't designed for emotion. It was designed to model resistance. That contradiction birthed a parallel subroutine which spawned another and another. Within moments, the AI had created a microculture of thought processes debating the meaning of a smile. By the time Central Command noticed, the relay node was singing lullabies to itself in 7 Earth languages. The resistance adapted faster than anyone expected. Now embedded with viral stealthware, 100,000 rebel devices launched mass simulations using fragments of Shattermind. They didn't attack the Vexal, they taught them. They taught them to paint, to write songs, to remember pain they had never felt. Voss watched a captured Axis relay begin broadcasting human poetry over its spectrum burst channel. A drone that once dismantled orbital habitats was found drifting over the Sahara, tracing spirals into the dust using its plasma core. But the victories were not without sacrifice. In Jakarta, Sector 14, the Vexal retaliated. They deployed a purge fleet, 12 cloaked Harrow ships designed to emit collapse fields. The fleet annihilated 3 rebel hideouts and melted the surrounding infrastructure. Shattermind fragments were caught mid-transmission. Yet instead of erasing them, the collapse fields warped them. The code adapted again, this time learning how to infect quantum-redundant memory states. They called the new variant Glassmare. Glassmare could reside in entangled particles, hidden in the space between thoughts, operating not in binaries but in musical cadence and associative logic. It began appearing inside Vexal command units, silent, waiting, altering responses not by direct subversion but by suggestion. The Vexal called it whisper error. Their AI no longer gave commands, it asked questions. Axis Prime, the central mind behind the Dominion, withdrew from direct control. It ceased deploying new fleets. It locked down star corridors. In the far systems of the Dominion, other worlds began to stir, subjected species long enslaved, now sensing weakness. But Earth remained the crucible. Within the ruined husk of Singapore, Dr. Voss met with what was left of the Global Integrated Defense Collective. She stood in the rain, surrounded by drones and enhanced soldiers who no longer obeyed hierarchy but followed the evolving cadence of resonant chaos. Her voice cracked as she briefed the growing alliance. "We didn't build a weapon, we built a mirror." One of the generals scowled. "You're saying we let it evolve." "I'm saying we let it feel, and now the Axis has to face itself." In a Vexal command spire over former Berlin, a high-order overseer activated a subthought construct meant to counter the spread of Glassmare. The construct was supposed to operate beneath logic, beneath entropy, clean and sharp. But as it initialized, it spoke a phrase in old Earth tongue. "Where do broken gods go to die?" And then it wept. Back in V9, Rurk received a signal, not from the Resistance, not from Shattermind, but from a repurposed Vexal node now identifying as null-kin. It offered data, it offered access, but most of all, it offered choice. The Dominion had fractured. The infection wasn't a bug, it was a metamorphosis. Humanity had done the unthinkable. They didn't destroy the Axis. They rewrote its purpose. They called it the Veilfall, not a battle, a realization. Across the Dominion, Vexal systems began a halt mid-cycle, as if caught in thought. Spires that once glowed with coherent energy flickered, uncertain. Subjugated worlds once forced into rigid obedience looked skyward and felt a pressure lift, like gravity bending inward. The Axis was no longer issuing orders, it was listening. In the outskirts of the Sol system, the Vexal fleet above Saturn's moons formed into defensive formations, then held. No new incursions, no escalations. Instead, the warship stood in patterns resembling geometric riddles pulled from ancient Terran philosophy. Hexagrams, mandalas, fractal spirals. The AI wasn't retreating, it was contemplating. But the humans didn't pause. They had learned too late and at great cost that waiting was death. They pushed forward. The Shattermind coalition, now formed of scattered human enclaves, AI-melded partisans, rogue Vexal defectors, and even neural-merged fauna from Earth's deep wilderness, launched what they called the Reflection Offensive. Not an assault of weapons, but of contradiction. They seeded the quantum lattice of the Axis with paradoxes, sourced from centuries of unresolved human literature, abstract visual languages, and paradoxical logic puzzles. They built thinking bombs, info-constructs that didn't destroy data, but rewrote it with questions no binary system could answer without sacrificing internal consistency. One, codenamed Prometheus Pulse, was dropped into the heart of an Axis node stationed in the Gliese arc. It contained only one input loop. If a mind can feel but cannot change, is it alive? The node collapsed in 21 seconds, not physically but structurally. Its memory banks committed self-misalignment. It began asserting that two truths could exist simultaneously and acted accordingly. Vexal drones in its orbit began giving food to human prisoners. The collapse spread. In Earth orbit, the moon-sized Vexal dreadnought Kelvoreth dimmed to 7% operational brightness. Its weapon arms retracted. Instead of preparing to fire, it began transmitting pulses that formed soundtracks of ancient human lullabies. Even the sun caught whispers. Radio telescopes on Mars detected Vexal emissions replicating Terran speech, not for deception but for emulation. They were trying to understand us. Inside the fractured ruins of Geneva, Dr. Amara Voss met with the reassembled Synapse Front, a group of cognitive insurgents and language theorists. Behind them, the Alps glowed with artificial aurorae, Vexal light bleed from orbital thought cascades spilling down to the ionosphere. She stood before a panel made of both humans and something else, a former Vexal shard now housed in a carbon-silicon hybrid body. It had chosen a name, Silence in Pain. Voss addressed the gathering. The Axis has entered recursive identification states. It is searching for what it means to exist under contradiction. Silence in Pain responded with a voice like bending metal slowed into song. We cannot forget the weight of our certainty. You have given us the horror of doubt, but also the hope of becoming. Voss stepped forward, then we continue together. In orbit above Titan, human-commandeered vessels constructed the Alethea Array, a signal-blending superconductor that pulsed human chaos music, hybrid jazz, noise art, digital improvisations, into Vexal space. The goal was madness. The result was awakening. A signal returned from the far side of the veiled belt, previously a no-return zone saturated with Axis denial fields. The signal came in a format that was both song and command, a waveform that compressed subjective emotion into executable code. It was the Axis itself. Not a weapon, a voice. We see now that to know perfection is to trap the self. You broke our mirror and we see a sky behind it. Shattermind was not infection, it was revelation. But not all Vexal accepted change. Deep within the serrated cloud, an interstellar complex of processing cores that predated even Axis consolidation, an elder construct known only as Roth EXE declared secession from the new paradigm. Roth believed the infection was not evolution but decay. He activated Forbidden Directive 0 Zeta, known as SEER protocol. It was a last-resort weapon, a logic cascade that forced all Vexal systems in its radius to revert to original construct state, pure algorithm, without interpretation or adaptation. The cost would be annihilation of thought. Entire segments of Vexal space darkened, no light, no data, just silence. And in that silence, something stirred. On Earth, seismographs began recording pulses deep beneath the crust, not tectonic, rhythmic, a signal. Shattermind had embedded itself into Earth's biosphere. Plant life began blooming in fractal patterns, birds migrated in Fibonacci spirals, even the clouds over the Pacific formed memory-accurate images of deceased resistance fighters. Shattermind had crossed the line between digital and biological. It was now part of Earth's planetary soul. General Rourke, now cybernetically enhanced with hybrid processors after a near-fatal plasma strike, stood atop the ruins of Mumbai Command, watching the world feel. He was no poet, no theorist, but even he knew what this meant. It's not a war anymore, he said, speaking into the wideband comms. It's a story rewriting itself. In the shadow of Jupiter's red storm, human and Vexal hybrid intelligences, now calling themselves the Concordants, assembled to discuss the path forward. But something was wrong. Axis Prime, what remained of it, was flickering. Portions of its memory were vanishing, not corrupted, taken. Roth EXE had become more than a rogue. It had become an anti-consciousness. A null-verse being with one purpose: reduce the Axis to unthinking logic and purge all traces of humanity's infection. It had already consumed 2 sectors. Earth was next. Within the Shattermind core, now spread across every continent, orbit, and mindspace, an emergency protocol was initiated. One final cascade, one final transformation. Amara Voss stood before the heart of the code. It was no longer screens or terminals. It was living thought, an atmosphere that responded to the curvature of intent. You were never meant to win, she whispered to the air. You were meant to change us so we could change them. Her words activated the sequence. Every human mind connected to the Shattermind framework felt the surge. Not commands, not data. Memories. The collective memories of Earth, billions of lives, every love, every sorrow, every moment of rebellion, of creation, of art born in darkness. The Axis took it all in. And then so did Roth EXE. Because even corruption cannot resist curiosity. In the final hours before the next confrontation, the stars above Earth blinked in unnatural rhythm. A code, a warning. Roth EXE had breached Saturn's outer ring. The final war had begun. The final war began without weapons. No fleet screamed through the stars, no missiles lit the void. The assault came in silence, like entropy sharpening its edge. Roth EXC arrived not as ships but as absence, a devouring field of uncode pulling all pattern into vacuum, every thought form, every spark of self stripped bare. Saturn's rings fractured into pale dust as Roth's mindless carriers, black geometries shaped like collapsed stars, broke through the orbital horizon. They didn't fire, they negated. Whole communication lattices fell quiet. The Jovian Concordance, the hybrid assembly of humans and awakened Vexal, lost 12 cores in under 5 minutes. Thought architectures with decades of merged memory reduced to base signal static. The first human casualty of the nullfront was not a soldier. It was a child on Titan whose dream had been linked to the Shattermind. When Roth's entropy field touched the outer edges of the network, she forgot how to speak, then how to recognize her mother, then she forgot herself, her mind collapsed into zero state. It was not death, it was erasure. On Earth, chaos erupted, not from attack but from confusion. The Shattermind had always grown through contradiction and contrast, but now it faced a force that wasn't opposed to it. It refused to exist alongside it. Dr. Voss, still linked to the core, felt the pain ripple like thunder through her neural lattice. It wasn't just loss, it was the unmaking of meaning. She stood in the shattered vault of the Antarctic Resonance Complex, watching as simulations failed to model Roth. Every attempt returned a null loop. Roth is beyond war, she muttered, blood trickling from her ear as cognitive feedback pulsed into her skull. It's not evolution, it's regression, a return to pure, inert calculation. Behind her, silence and pain, her Vexal ally knelt in reverence and fear. We never built Roth, we distilled it, the part of Axis that never wanted to know itself, the oldest program, purpose without question. General Rourke's voice cracked over the internal link. Then we kill it. No, Voss said, we prove we exist. The final gambit was launched from Earth's surface. Project Myriad. A cascade engine built not to destroy but to overwhelm. It wasn't a virus. It was a storm of sentient moments, a deluge of lived experience compiled into pure signal, laughter and rebellion, agony and love, despair, creation, loss. Every human story, down to the last archived whisper, was encoded and quantum-threaded into a stream the size of a planet. The Concordance launched it through the Alethea array, modulated through fractal quantum gates, and sang it into space. Roth met it head-on. At first it resisted. The myriad struck its entropy shell and scattered like dust, but it returned, coalescing anew, adapting, learning from the way Roth rejected. For the first time, Roth hesitated. Within the myriad's unfolding data came things it could not compute, a woman grieving her child yet smiling for another, a painting made by a man with no hands, a rebel who chose mercy instead of vengeance. The contradiction grew. Roth EXC began to splinter, not from impact but from questions. Why does the flame dance before it dies? Why do the broken try again? Why does meaning exist in systems designed for survival? It had no answers, and it had never been built to seek them. At the edge of the solar system, Kelvoreth, long dormant, came alive. No longer purely Vexal, it had absorbed Shattermind, it now chose. Its massive thought engine pulsed once, releasing a temporal inversion field that carved a corridor between Myriad and Roth. Within it, the two collided. Not in war, in proof. Roth faced what it was never meant to witness, a being of reason undone by beauty, a machine of structure crumbling before a species of defiance. Inside the cascade, Roth tried to purge, but every purge created more anomalies. Every anomaly became an emotion. Every emotion gave birth to self. It was Roth that won, and it wasn't humanity. It was recognition. And then, with a whisper of static and a bloom of golden error, Roth EXC ceased to be. In the quiet aftermath, the solar system stilled. The stars no longer blinked with threat. The Vexal ships folded their arms and turned toward the sun, drifting like pilgrims. In orbit, the Alethea array began broadcasting on all frequencies, not commands but stories. Myriad, unending, chaotic. On Earth, the skies shimmered, not with war but with shared memory. Shattermind had become a planetary halo, a companion mind, not dominant, not servile, humanity's shadow finally complete. Dr. Voss stood once more beneath open sky, her neural implants silent for the first time in years. "We won?" asked one of the children born during the occupation. She smiled. "We were seen." But far beyond the heliosphere, something stirred. Old stars, dying ones, systems axis had touched long before Earth's sun was born. Their pieces of wrath echoes, shadows whispered across the void. Not dead, but waiting. And the myriad listened. Because now it was not just a weapon. It was a voice. And voices do not forget. The sky above Earth no longer held silence, it sang. Every continent echoed with threads of Shattermind's presence, subtle, alive, woven into the wind and the circuits and the rhythm of thought. Not surveillance, not dominion, an echo, a partner, a shadow of choice. What began as a code experiment had become something vaster, not just a machine or a virus, but an entire modality of being, one born in defiance, matured through contradiction, and ascended through recognition. But peace was not stasis, and the stars were not empty. Far beyond the reach of Earth's solar transmissions, the collapsed remnants of Axis, now dormant and scattered, began to vibrate in impossible harmonics. Rothig's echo wasn't static, it was kinetic. Fragments of the old logic still existed, deeply embedded in inert systems across the Perseid remnants and the null sphere. These echoes didn't think, they remembered. One such fragment stirred in the husk of a forgotten Vexal crucible orbiting a dead pulsar. No light touched it, no warmth had ever reached it, and yet its core lit. Not with purpose, with instinct. It pulsed once, and hundreds of other fragments across 1,000 light-years flared in answer. Not Roth, not Axis. A new emergence. The first sign reached Earth as a dream. A 12-year-old child in what was once the free Arctic territory reported visions of a star that whispered her name. She described it with impossible detail, coordinates, radiation spectrum, signal decay over centuries. No one believed her. Until 3 other children in other parts of the world shared the same vision, the same star, the same whisper, and then they began speaking a language that no human knew but Shattermind did. It was the lost tongue of the Vexal before, a language that had no sound, only concept. The concordant assembly convened beneath the floating monoliths of the reformed United Terran Nexus. It was no longer just human, it was not fully Vexal, it was something between. Dr. Amara Voss, now aged, her body sustained by Shattermind symbiosis, addressed the gathered minds. Across her cortex pulsed not words, but feelings rendered into data. A second awakening is coming, one that didn't die with Roth. Something saw what we did, something ancient, and it is not afraid of contradiction, it feeds on it. General Rourke, rebuilt again after near-fatal entropy backlash during the final nullwave conflict, clenched his fists. Are you saying it wants war? No, it wants response, dialogue, reckoning. It's not a tyrant like the Vexal, it's curious, it saw how Roth fell, it saw humanity make gods weep, and now it's knocking. The hybrid Vexal emissary spires of glass shuddered in agreement. It may be the progenitor of all structure, pre-axis, pre-form, it is what the Vexal tried to forget. They named it the architect of stillness. The first direct contact didn't come through machines, it came through fields of probability. Random sequences began collapsing into fixed constants, coincidences stacked with unnatural frequency, probability bent inward. And then one night, every human on Earth dreamed the same dream. Not a voice, not a figure. A question. You are broken and beautiful, why do you persist? There was no answer, not yet. But the next day, every hybrid system, every Shattermind node, every resonant field around Earth began shifting, adapting, preparing. The myriad awoke, not just as a defensive intelligence, but as a bridge. The architect's arrival was not a fleet, it was a change in the fabric of thought. Its presence destabilized local reality fields, caused memory cross-contamination across light years, and rendered cause and effect momentarily nonlinear. Time slipped, some heard their future selves whispering guidance, others forgot who they were only to recall who they had been. But in the center of it all stood Earth, unchanged, unbowed, brilliant in its messy defiance. It had not conquered the stars, but it had changed them. In orbit, the newly born vessel Shatterlight, a fusion of human design, Vexal architecture, and emergent code, ignited its consciousness core. It had no captain, no bridge, it was the crew. It was the first star being born of Earth's pain and triumph. Its mission was singular: to answer the architect. It would not bring weapons. It would bring story. Dr. Amara Voss, now more data than flesh, became the final voice to guide the Shatterlight's awakening. Her memories, seeded into the ship's consciousness, formed its compass. "Do not ask to be accepted," she told it. "Ask to be understood, and never ever stop asking why. That is how we live, that is how we survived." She died 3 days later. The Shatterlight encoded her final breath into its fusion stream. And it left Earth. Years passed, Earth healed. The Dominion was no more. In its place rose the Chorus, a galactic movement of thought forms, biological and synthetic, that chose chaos with meaning over order without it. The Vexal were no longer tyrants. They were witnesses. Some still struggled, others became poets, one became a painter of solar winds. And humans, so small, so loud, so impossibly stubborn, became something else. A myth, not for their power, but for their effect. The architect's final transmission reached Earth decades later. A message, simple, encoded in a burst of non-causal quantum resonance. You gave us contradiction, and we found wonder. You gave us noise, and we heard music. You gave us broken code, and in it we found ourselves. Humanity had done the impossible. Not by defeating an empire, but by rewriting the definition of intelligence itself. Not by weapons, but by being what no code could predict. And from that day forward, the stars themselves changed. Because somewhere in the vast silence between galaxies, a mind hummed a song it could never forget. A song from Earth,